Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development and psychology to try and maybe help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. And last time we were talking about, ethnic groups and, developing your identity formation and what ethnic factors might have to do with that. And so we're going to talk a little bit more on that. About 1/5 of the participants, some at each stage, had negative attitudes toward their own ethnic group. And isn't that a shame? That you would have a negative attitude about your own ethnic group. And that comes from hearing prejudices from the majority or other, ethnic groups. I say it doesn't matter what your ethnic group is. There's no across the board label that fits any and every one in a certain ethnic group. So if you're hearing that stuff, let it go for what it is. People are prejudiced for one reason or another, and let it go. However, those in the achieve stage showed better overall adjustment than those in the other groups. So see, once you achieve identity status, you realize that it don't matter what they think. What matters is what you think about who you are. That is the sign of, having achieved an identity, is that you ain't too worried about what other people think about your identity. They thought more highly of themselves, had a greater sense of mastery, and reported more positive family relationships and social and peer interactions. And that's because they were, well adjusted, knew who they were. Now, in some families, you can't really have positive family relationships. But you can have positive social and peer relations, which I always did. And that can give you, a sense of mastery, over your identity. If you didn't come up in the best situation, and you don't have positive family relationships, you can make your own family. The people that you choose to hang around with. It's like my son, used to have Friendsgiving and, Friendsmas and things where he would have friends over, to his house for these holidays. He would also have the family days, but, rather than mix everybody together, he decided they would have separate, his, her, the friends. And it worked good for them, and they had fun. So, Now we're going to talk about sexuality. Don't giggle. Yeah, we all do. You say that word, sexuality, and people are like, oh, because it makes us nervous, because it's something that we're insecure about and we think about, and, it's just part of being human. We're animals, we're not vegetable, we're not mineral, so to reproduce, we have to have sex, And, God gave us a bonus that it feels good when we do it, so, that encourages us to do it. Seeing oneself as a sexual being, recognizing one's sexual orientation, coming to terms with sexual stirrings, and forming romantic or sexual attachments, all are parts of achieving sexual identity. That's what you're going to have to figure out, is who you are sexually. It's harder for some, it's easier for some, everyone's different. The urgent awareness of sexuality is an important aspect of identity formation. So, it plays a part in who you are. Profoundly affecting self-image and relationships, because it will, impact you in how you see yourself, and your relationships with other people. Although this process is biologically driven, its expression is part of culturally culturally defined. So, sexuality is biologically driven. It's not a choice. Anybody who tells you that, that's wrong. They're ignorant. They don't know what they're talking about. It's biologically driven. And culturally defined means that there are within certain sexual cultures, a certain way one behaves or says their own slang, whatever. Sexual orientation. Excuse me. Although present in younger children, it is in adolescence that a person's sexual orientation generally becomes a pressing issue, because you're filling up with those sex hormones and you start to have desires, so it becomes more of an issue. Whether that person will consistently be sexually, romantically, and affectionately attracted to persons of the other sex, heterosexual, or the same sex, homosexual, or of both sexes, bisexual. So, doesn't matter what your sexuality is, you will be usually consistently attracted to these people. Now, it says whether or not. So, people can change their mind. You can dabble in one, realize it's not for me, and go the other way. And this happens all the time. It's normal. Homosexuality is common in some cultures, such as the Melanesian Islands in the South Pacific, but not in the United States and other Western countries. So they've accepted it there. That's just part of life. And we just learned it's biologically driven, so it is just part of life. And it's like I said, I knew of a bull and a dog that were gay, so if it's happening in nature, it's natural. I know there's people who don't believe that way. I ain't even gonna get into that. In one study of 38,000 American students in grades 7 through 12, about 88% described themselves as predominantly heterosexual, and only 1% as predominantly homosexual or bisexual. So, in these students that they looked at, 88% said that they were straight, 1% said they were gay. So we still have, 11% of the population who've undeclared yet. But 11%, mostly younger students, were unsure of their sexual orientation. And that's normal, because you only become a sexual being once you're sexually mature. And your mentality plays a part in that. So you have to be at least mentally sure of who you are before you adopt, a schema for your sexuality. However, social stigma may bias such self-reports, underestimating the prevalence of homosexuality and bisexuality. And that's because kids are afraid that they'll get labeled or it'll get out somehow and people will not accept them. Research into sexual orientation has been focused primarily on efforts to explain the less common condition, homosexuality. And again, it's a medical-based condition. There are DNA evidences, there are, hormonal evidences, there are, differences in structures in the brain. So it's an actual medical thing. And someone who says it's not is just ignorant of the facts. Homosexuality once was considered a mental illness, but several decades of research have found no association between sexual orientation and emotional or social problems. So, back in the olden days when they had the sanitariums and they lock you in there for being gay or whatever, or even nowadays, just within the past 20, 30 years, there were groups who believed that they could take you to a camp of sorts and rid you of the gayness. And these people suffered very bad physical, emotional, psychological trauma and spiritual trauma because, this was done by religious organizations, to change them back to normal. And here we just learned it's biological, so it is normal for them. These findings eventually led the psychiatric profession to stop classifying homosexuality as a mental disorder, because it's not. It's a physical thing, and the psychiatrists realized this and said, oh, well, we need to change this in our, book of definitions, because it's not a mental problem. Other common explanations for homosexuality, all scientifically discredited, point to disturbed relationships with parents. So that's not going to make you gay if you don't have a good relationship with the opposite sex parent. That's again, old wives' tale thing, is discredited by the psychiatric community. Parental encouragement of unconventional, cross-gender behavior. So just because if mommy puts the boy in a dress or daddy puts the girl in, a baseball glove, they're not going to make them gay. Again, wives' tale. Imitation of homosexual parents. So they're not going to, gay parents are not going to make you gay. So those religious people who want to argue that about the gay parents, it's not true. Or chance learning through seduction by a homosexual. So, if the child is seduced by a homosexual, that's not going to make them turn homosexual. Those are all discredited by the psychiatric community. So these are rumors that ignorant people spread and, people believe because they don't know any better. So, this is why I'm teaching you these things, because, I don't want you to be ignorant. As Jesus said, I would not have you be ignorant, folks. My goodness. I keep looking at this little doodad here, making sure it's right. Trying to get a sore throat again. Many young people have one or more homosexual experiences as they're growing up, usually before age 15. So, that's normal. If you kissed a girl and you liked it, you dig the taste of her cherry chapstick, that's normal. You might change your mind later on. I don't like girls. I experimented, I'm good. Or, I kissed a boy, if you're a boy, and you digged it, and then you don't want that later on. That's normal. People experiment with their sexuality. It's a thing. However, isolated experiences, or even homosexual attractions or fantasies, do not determine sexual orientation. So, if you have these experiences or if you have fantasies, it doesn't necessarily mean you're gay. You just might be going through this phase in your life, and you might grow out of it. According to one theory, sexual orientation may be influenced by a complex prenatal process involving both hormonal and neurological factors. So, it could be what's happening in the womb. It could be dictated from day one, the day you're born. If the levels of sex hormones in a fetus of either sex between the 2nd and 5th months of gestation are in the typical female range, the person is likely to be attracted to males after puberty. So, if that fetus has this range of female hormones, even if it's a male, when it becomes a sexual being, it's likely to be attracted to males. If the hormone levels are in the male range, the person is likely to be attracted to females. So, even if it's a girl baby, if the hormones are in this level of that range, when they grow up, they might be attracted to females. Whether and how hormonal activity may affect brain development, and whether and how differences in brain structure may affect sexual orientation have not been well established. But they have studied it, and there have been notable differences. So this is an ongoing study. And, maybe more will be found out later on. But an anatomical orientation difference between homosexual and heterosexual men in an area of the brain that governs sexual behavior has been reported. So, there is a difference between heterosexual and homosexual brains. That has been reported. So, again, if someone's telling you it ain't natural, it's not a thing, they're wrong. It's a thing. Sexual orientation seems to be at least partly genetic. An identical twin of a homosexual has about a 50% probability of also being homosexual, while a fraternal twin has only about a 20% likelihood, and an adopted sibling only a 10% or less. So, there is some genetics involved in this. So later on, people try to fit in the norms, and I know of at least a handful of people whose parents had them, then had brothers or sisters or whatever, and then suddenly, when they were older, decided, I'm gay, and changed to the other, sexes, and that's not uncommon. So, we need to be more accepting of people and their families and their lives, because there's a reason for everything. Unless you are in their shoes, you don't know what's going on, because there is a biological basis, for homosexuality. In a large-scale nationally representative survey that included 794 twin pairs, the concordance rate for non-heterosexual orientation among monozygotic or identical twins was about 31.6%, compared with an 8.3% for dizygotic or fraternal twins. It does matter. Genetics does matter. You inherit everything. That little genome there, everything that is going to be you is programmed physically now. Everything's going to be physically you is programmed into that. Now, it's the nature-nurture thing. The nature of you is in that genetic code. The nurture of you is going to predict how you turn out as a person. And again, you can also step in and change that. You can nurture yourself if you didn't get that growing up from the parents. One series of studies linked male homosexuality to a small region of the X chromosome inherited from the mother. So if there were gay people on the mom's side of the family, there can be gay people as you go down the generations. That's just a fact. However, later research failed to replicate the finding, but the finding was there. And the problem with these researches is getting reliable people to volunteer and allowing the findings to be reported. So, there's still a lot of research to be done. And, maybe that's why our president wanted the money to go into these gender studies, to figure out, what is the rumor, what is the BS and the prejudice, and what is the facts, because we know right now there's a lot of gender identity crisis, and, fluidity going on. So it's not a bad thing to know what the facts are. Controversy remains as to whether or not sexual orientation is decisively shaped either before birth or at an early age. And it's probably both. You might be genetically predisposed to getting diabetes, but if you are taught that eating a lot of sugar is bad for you and you should rather eat fruit and stuff, and you do, chances are you're not going to end up being a diabetic. And if you have a tendency to be gay, but you like the opposite sex, and you fall in love with a wonderful, say you're a guy, a woman, and you love them, then the chance is less likely that you will be gay. You probably might stay with her if there's no problems in the marriage. So again, everyone's different. Every situation's different. You can't really play anything like that across the board because there's just too many variables in a living being. There also is dispute as to the relative contributions of biological, psychological, and social influences. So again, your physiology, your mental situation, and your social conditioning all play a part in your sexuality. These influences may well be impossible to untangle, and their relative strength may differ among individuals. So it might be hard to figure out why, you are one sex or another. Like I said, you could be biologically predisposed. We know that's a thing. You can be rebelling against the parents, and I know there are some who are like that. So you go the opposite way. And also, this is the group you're in. And I know my son was talking about in his high school, it became cool to have a different gender, to be gay or bi or, non-binary or whatever. And, it was part of the culture, a little clique that they had in their school. So, all these things wrapped up together, so that it's hard to tell, unless you go into get a volunteer to go into some deep, psychotherapy and psychiatric study, and most people are not going to do that. So, sexual behavior. It is difficult to do research on sexual behavior. People willing to answer questions about sex tend to be sexually active and liberal in their attitudes towards sex, and thus are not representative of the population. So, people who are willing to go into a study about sex are probably, very sexual and might even be bragging a little bit. So, it's hard to do a study on, sexual behavior with the average person. Because the average person is not wanting to do that. Also, a discrepancy often exists between what people say about sex and what they do. And there is no way to corroborate what people say. Because you can say anything, like I said, and, how are we going to know? We wasn't in the bedroom filming, we don't know whether you did that or not. So, some may conceal sexual activity, others may exaggerate. So, again, people lie, unfortunately. And you might not admit to as many sexual partners as you had, or you might say you had a few more. Problems multiply in surveying young people, because young people are under pressure from, the society, from the parents, school authority figures. They might not want to tell, For one thing, parental consent is often required, and parents who grant permission may not be typical. So very liberal parents would probably grant permission to say you can ask their child questions about sexual behavior, but most conservative people or, moderate people are probably like, no, you're not going to talk to my kid about sexual behavior, no. Methodologies can make a difference. Adolescent boys are more open in reporting certain types of sexual activity when surveys are self-administered by a computer. Of course they are. Of course the boys are more forthcoming. Unfortunately, teenage boys' culture considers that bragging rights, Still, within the groups that take part in surveys, we can see trends that reveal cultural differences and changes in sexual mores. So again, culture plays a part in sexuality as well. You learn what you live. Heterosexual activity. Internationally, there are wide variations in timing of sexual initiation. And that means the age at which you start having sex. The percentage of women who report having first intercourse by 17 is 10 times as great in Mali, 72%, as in Thailand, 7%, or the Philippines, only 6%. So, in the more conservative cultures, there's not a lot of sex happening in young women. And in the more liberal cultures, there is. Similar differences exist for men. So, again, same thing for boys. Although earlier male initiation is the norm in most cultures, in Mali and Ghana, more women than men become sexually active at an early age. And that's because when the woman starts menstruating, they are considered women. And it's more likely that they will even be married, but will become sexually active. Since the 1920s, the United States has witnessed an evolution in sexual behavior. And we have, because they decided that, these old-fashioned, hookups and marriages weren't really working well. They want to choose their own mate. They want to have premarital sex, see if it's good and if they want to stay with this person. So, things change. Premarital sexual activity has become more common, especially among girls. So it used to be girls who did that got a reputation, oh, she's a bad girl or whatever. So, but after the 20s, it got a little more liberal and people were, more real about things, In the mid-1950s, 1 out of 4 girls had sexual experiences by the age of 18. So by the 1950s, a fourth of us were doing it. I wasn't there, but Today, well over half of both girls and boys, 65 and 68% respectively, have had intercourse by that age. So more than half of us have had sex by the time we're 18 years old. The average girl in the United States now has her first sexual intercourse at age 17. And that makes sense, senior year, prom, only 1 year later than the average boy. So boys, they get that car at age 16. They decide, I'll take a chick out in the car, go park somewhere, and, In 1995, nearly 2/3, 63%, of sexually experienced, never married 15 to 19-year-old girls and about 3/4 of sexually experienced boys in that age group reported having more than one partner. So see, that's the thing that worries me. We need to teach our children about love and faithfulness, because that's an important thing. When you got all these kids running around screwing a bunch of people, that's how sexually transmitted diseases spread, and people have unwanted pregnancies. So, we need to teach our children that, like I told my boys, if you're going to go out in the rain, wear the raincoat. Don't have unprotected sex. Do it smart if you're going to do it. And let's face it, most teenagers are going to do it. The biological drive, those hormones are kicking too hard, unless they're a super saint, no, I won't, they're probably gonna. They're kissing, and one thing leads to another, and they ran in the bases, and chances are they're gonna do it. 24% of the boys and 14% of the girls had 6 or more. See, to me, that's scary. I haven't had that many in my entire life. 6 or more partners. Yeek. You need to be talking to these kids, man. You need to tell these kids about love and faithfulness and, what it's all about. That you're giving the precious gift of yourself to the one you love. It's not about boinking. Because to me, that's scary. Still, the wave of sexual liberation seems to be ebbing, especially among boys, whose sexual behavior is becoming more like that of girls. Because people are talking to him and telling them it's important, this is a show of affection, and boys are realizing they want it to be special too, and if you go out and screw everything that moves, you're going to end up with a venereal disease. You're going to end up with unwanted children. We've got the phrases now, baby mama, baby daddy. I think that's awful. The proportion of never married 15 to 19-year-olds with sexual experience declined between 1988 and 1999 from 56% to 52%, with the biggest decrease among boys. Because, like I said, boys are starting to realize, too, that it should be something special and that they don't want to have, VD and a bunch of unwanted kids. However, the proportion of girls who has had intercourse before age 15 rose from 11% to 19%. So, we need to tell our children, yes, you're going through puberty. Your hormones are ramping up. You're going to want to have sex. But be smart about it, Don't put yourself in any situation, get shot by any parents. If you're going to have sex, use birth control, because, you don't want your child to have VD or a child that they don't want in their teens because they made one mistake, Love your kids enough to do that for them. And that's where I'm going to leave you today. Please like and share this so we can spread this educational program around the world. If you want to help me, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me more, go on my Patreon page and become a patron. That's all for now. Until next time. And I hope this did help you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do.